Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to speak here. I really appreciate it. This is a great time to be in the music industry. This is going to be a much lighter presentation than the one prior. Everyone has read in recent years about free music and people sharing music and the record companies tanking. And I would put forth that, music has really always been free. It's only been recent where you've had record companies in the middle between artists and their fans. So, maybe it's not such a big deal that we're kind of going back in time. Artists have always performed music. It started in the court. There were patrons. They were subsidizing the artist. You were performing in the room with the patron. You were having fun. It was entertainment. That's what it was all about. It was a social art form. It wasn't a business. For many artists, and artists that I know, who are truly passionate about what they do, it's all they know how to do. They want to entertain people, and they need an audience. Jason talked earlier about the best thing that you could have is an audience. The best thing that an artist can have is an audience. But technology has changed everything in music. It's actually been driving the industry for many, many years. The music industry really began with the radio. A huge piece of technology that people would now gather around their radio. There's my grandparents and my parents hanging out, having a good time, listening to music. Again, it was a social experience, but it was also free, right? In the 50s, vinyl records changed the nature of the music industry. They fixed the performance in time. If you think about it, prior to this, you'd go to a concert, you'd go to a show, and you'd enjoy the music, but most likely from night to night, it was performed a little bit differently. There might have been different musicians in the band might have been feeling a little differently, they might have played it a little faster, whatever. But records fixed it in time to the point where now you heard a song over and over and over and over and over again, exactly the same way. It was good and it was bad. It also allowed sort of a shift in time and space. The artist didn't have to be in the room with you any longer. But that was a real shift. Television was the next technology that really changed the music industry. When Elvis appeared on TV, that was the beginning of mass marketing of music. Followed shortly by these folks from Liverpool. When they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, the music industry would never be the same up till today. And I know, myself personally, when I saw these guys, I knew I wanted to be a rock star. I just knew it. So an industry formed around this mass marketing of pieces of plastic. And it became, for the size of the music industry, it's actually a relatively complex business. A lot of rights flowing around, lots of different parties with interrelationships. But ultimately, it's between the artist and the fan. And kind of what's in the middle is what's changing. And I would put forth that it's not really that important what's in the middle between the artist and the fan. And what's wrong if that changes and becomes better? Record labels became the engine that drove music. They invested in the artists. They sold those pieces of plastic to recoup their investment. And publishing companies were formed to exploit the song. So they exploited the rights in the actual writing of the song, and they would license music around. Radio came to play, and after long battles and lots of arguments, Congress forced the radio stations to pay a royalty to the publishers for these songs that were being played. But a royalty was not paid to the record companies. It was just to the publishers. And the argument was that this is free publicity for your artists. You're going to sell a ton of records by getting this free radio airplay, so we're not going to pay you. This became a really big business. Music grew. And the target market primarily for music is kids. under 25, under 20. That's where the growth and the money came from. Technology continued to march on here. Cassette tapes, the Walkman, became one of the best-selling consumer electronics products of all time. Anybody remember the 8-track? Right? That was an attempt to make a tape that was more convenient, that you didn't have to rewind. It would just play again forever and ever and ever. Same way. Synthesizers came about and changed the way music was produced. Synthesizers were good and bad. They changed the palette of sounds available to people, and they made it a much richer experience. But at the same time, they put musicians out of work. If you could make an electronic violin sound, you didn't necessarily need that violin player. Finally, the personal computer had a huge, and continues to have a huge impact on the music industry. And I can tell you that Apple has always had their eye on the music business. I was there in the 80s when Apple first came out, and they were actually forbidden to enter the music business by the Beatles record company over the name Apple. Apple Records was the Beatles record company. So for many, many years, Apple could not get into the music business. The compact disc came along in '82. Sony and Philips introduced this format into the marketplace, and it was marketed as pure sound forever, pure digital sound forever. It was an attempt by the labels to make music sound better, of course, but it was also a way for them to get you to buy your entire record collection again in digital form. That was their primary motivation. What they failed to recognize, you talk about unintended consequences. What they failed to recognize is they digitized their entire catalog and put it out in an unprotected format to the entire world at $18.95 a pop. That failure to understand what they were doing is coming back to haunt them right now. In the early 80s, I got involved in a project called MIDI, Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And this was an attempt to network instruments together. So I could play on one keyboard, and I can hear sounds coming from all kinds of different instruments. We put a computer in the middle of that little network that we created, and we were able to record music, edit it, play it back, change it. It became a real revolution in the way music was made. Now, this standard was interesting in that it was the cooperation of a bunch of different companies to put together MIDI. There was no royalty involved. There were no licensing fees. There was no one dominant company that was kind of forcing this standard. It was really for the collective good of the industry. And indeed, it worked, because MIDI formed and spawned many different companies that grew and thrived in this atmosphere of sort of this collective, simple network to license or to connect music together. Ironically, MIDI is in every cell phone that you have. I kind of wish we had a royalty on that one. I want you to think about this one for a minute. The World Wide Web is just 18 years old. Think how that has changed everything, in the Western world. 18 years old is a heartbeat. If you're under 25, I think it's hard to imagine life without the digital network in this country. It's very difficult. You take it for granted. But it really hasn't been that long. 10 years ago, we had a format called MP3, which was designed to transmit music over a telephone. MP3 files took that compact disc and compressed it into a tiny, tiny file, a couple megabytes. Could send it over the network, no problem. Well, that combination of the MP3 file and the internet caused Sean Fanning, junior or sophomore at Northeastern University, to create Napster. And Napster was software that would go out and look on the very early web and find MP3 files that he could have. All of a sudden, he released this software for free. People from all over the world began using it. trading their music collections, trading their digitized CDs in MP3 format. This became an instant success, and it terrified and continues to terrify the record companies. But what they failed to realize was the interest in this phenomenon. Everybody wanted to do it. I mean, the numbers when Napster first took off were phenomenal. Something very, very different was happening in the music industry. The MP3 player, pretty much dominated by Apple, but lots of other manufacturers make these players, has completely dwarfed the Walkman in sales. These players have become a multi-billion-dollar business almost overnight. This has caused a transformation to shift now from the labels being in power to the tech companies and the fans being in power. And that's what's happening today. These are the record execs. They were having a lot of fun. They were making a lot of money. They thought their customers were Walmart and Target and Kmart. Some guys from Best Buy here. What they didn't really realize was their audience were people that were buying these discs and trading these files. And when they realized that people were trading their precious music files, what did they do? Did they go out and try and create relationships with them, even find out who they were? Well, they sued them. Now, how's that for a business model? You know, what were they thinking? Maybe they weren't really thinking much at all. So let me tell you a story now about an artist that had to go through this and deal with this in their career. This is Stanley Starsky. Stanley, he played in Queen Elizabeth's court in the early 1900s. A friend of his introduced him to a record exec, and he got on RKO radio. He got a record deal. He started to tour. They gave him an advance of $125 for his first record. Stanley had made it. He had really made it. He went on the road. He was Elvis's warm-up act for a year. He learned to live on the road. What he really learned was that in order to live, he had to sell flowers out of the back of his car because the record deal wasn't paying him any money, and he was making, you know, $20 a day playing the opening act for Elvis. So he got a personal computer to help him count the flower money because that was starting to add up now. He was really figuring out his business model. He knew he had to adapt to the times, so he took his computer and he got a MIDI accordion now. Stanley reinvented himself. He decided to be a heavy metal accordion player. It was the 80s, you know. So the record company loved this. They took him back out on the road. He started to, you know, have a couple of good years on the road playing dates and selling flowers. And one day, he realized that he had been replaced by a software plugin for the Mac. His career was pretty much over. Anybody could play an accordion now. They didn't need Stanley. So what did he do? He decided to kind of hang it up and help young new artists with all of his experience. So Stanley became an artist manager. In 2004, I wrote a book with a friend of mine, Gerd Leonard, about the future of music. And unfortunately, a lot of what we predicted and projected to come true is happening. Sales of recorded music have fallen about 50% from their peak. Thousands of bands have been dumped. Record companies are in a world of hurt. And interestingly enough, do you think that looks a little like Steve Jobs? Apple has become one of the most powerful companies in the music industry. I think I'm going to skip over that. One little known fact about the music business is that most artists never recoup their royalty advances. 95% of artists never recoup their royalty advance. So that $125 that Stanley got was all he ever made off of records. He had to make a living some other way. And think about that. The bands that you know and love are in that 5% of all artists ever signed. It's impossible, it has been impossible to make a living doing music. In our book, we predicted a device called the Universal Mobile Device, and that device has hit the market, and it's the iPhone. And you think about what the iPhone can do. You can network, you can communicate, you can play music, you can play videos, you can play games. It's always on. It runs applications. Think of what we're going to be able to hold in our hands or in our pockets some other way 5 years from now, and how that might affect the music business. I mean, we're going to be wearing jewelry and having clothing that plays music, among other things, for us. These are some MP3 sunglasses that I got from Oakley. You can buy these right now, pop them on. It's actually pretty cool. We're going to have a lot more choice here as time goes on. Artists. Artists are brands. When you think of artists that you love them because of who they are and the relationship that you want to have with them. It's not the record company, it's not the publishing company, it's the brand of the artist. You want to have a relationship with that artist as a music fan. Artists today are more likely to come to market through brands like Pepsi and Nike and Apple, breaking them on their commercials rather than the record companies. Or you'll get on TV, Grey's Anatomy, CSI. It's like hitting the lottery for a lot of people. This is the only thing that really matters. The relationship between artists and their fans. What's between them doesn't really matter and is changing profoundly. We've talked a lot in our book about music like water and how music will be all around you. It already is. In a wireless network, there's so much music flying around this room right now, if you want it. There are so many things that we're going to be able to do that are different than we've been able to do before. Here's a couple of examples. Right now with my iPhone, I can hear a song anywhere, listen to it with my phone, and buy it. You can hum into it and buy that song. It'll appear on your computer if you want it that way. Personalized radio. I can say I like Frank Sinatra, I like Bing Crosby, and I like Michael Jackson. And a radio station will be built for me based on that taste. It's called Pandora. It's on your phone. It's on your computer. These are things that are just happening today. Imagine going to a show and the audience collectively decides what the set list is going to be by texting in. Or you see lyrics streaming to you on your phone for new songs that are being played the first time. Or you walk out of the show and the concert's on your phone. Or you go home and the show has been transmitted. The entire show, video, audio, has been transmitted to your home. This is just the beginning. I'd like to close in saying that it's really never been a better time to be a musician or a songwriter than today. What is important is, how do you manage your career? You're not going to make very much money selling recorded music, so you have to figure out with your manager how you're going to go about it. So the industry is going through a big transformation today where the artists and their managers are becoming more important than the record labels. And smart artists and management companies are looking at all of the opportunities that are available to an artist. I can write, I can perform, I can record, I can create videos, I can do digital appearances, and anything that they can think of. So the company of the future in the music is going to be artist-based management companies that look after the interests of their artists rather than huge corporations interested in selling and recouping on pieces of plastic. It's going to be more about what's good for the artists and what's good for the fans. So I think the future of music is really very, very positive, and as the song says, our future's so bright, I gotta wear shades. Thank you.